So who has ever visited a prison? A few of you. So I'll tell you a little story. A few years ago, there was a man named Andy who was sentenced to prison, and during his stay, he really started to get along well with the guards, and the warden saw that really deep down he was a very kind person, and he decided that he wanted to let the gentleman learn a trade. And so he got him involved in carpentry. And he learned to be a really good carpenter, and they started to give him weekend passes so that he could go off and learn this trade better. And he became really good at kitchens. So the warden was actually remodeling his kitchen and he was doing a kind of do-it-yourself thing. And he got into a place where he was stuck and he needed some assistance. So he decided that he would ask Andy if Andy would come and help him finish the counterpiece. So he went and asked Andy, and Andy said, I'd really like to do that, warden, but I can't. And the warden said, well, why not? And he goes, well, the reason I got in here in the first place was for counterfeiting. Okay. There are no more bad jokes in my talk. So, why prison yoga? It's a question that the prison yoga team has asked fairly frequently. Why should we use our time and our precious resources on a group of people who, by all statistical knowledge, will most likely reoffend and will most likely spend the most of their life in a correctional setting? For me, that's exactly why I think that we need to have a prison yoga program. Society has come to see the incarceration of people as a solution to some complex social issues. We incarcerate more people than anybody else in the world. There are 2.2 million people incarcerated in the United States. We are less than 5% of the world's population, but we house over 25% of the prisoners in the world. Did you know that 1 in 32 people is either in jail, in prison, on parole, or on probation? 1 in 32. Prisons have become this place where we house our mentally ill, we house our substance abusers. Many of our homeless end up in prisons, along with very brutal and violent offenders, along with aging offenders and gang members. And here's the part to me that is most important. 95% of those individuals leave the prison and come back to our communities. So what happens to them while they're incarcerated, or what we can do for them while they're incarcerated, will have a huge impact on their families, their friends, and us as they come back into the community. They all have mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, children. They work in an environment with staff who often have to deal with stressful situations and have violence that is in the prison impact them, and they take that home to their families. Unfortunately, in California, over 60% of the inmate population returns to prison within 3 years of their release. So as you hear these discouraging statistics, you really have to ask yourself, have we identified any ways to change the trajectory of that offender's life? And I think while these statistics paint a picture, they don't really describe the personal and difficult journeys that these thousands of incarcerated men and women have to deal with in their existence. Last week, the Pope visited a prison in Pennsylvania, and he really gave us a powerful reminder of our need to address how we relate to inmates, the interconnection that we have with one another. No matter what your religious belief, he spoke of our humanness, our need to remember that deep inside every person, there is a light and a love that, with our help and support, might be able to come out. I think that inmates challenge us to live the principles of yoga. So at the Yoga Seed, we believe that yoga in prison holds a powerful solution that can provide for healing and provide for restoration and provide a place for inmates to practice nonviolence and for them to learn something and apply something that could result in long-term change in their life. So my commitment to yoga in prisons comes from a personal experience, and I have had the opportunity to also visit prison, but I wasn't a resident. I worked for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation for 16 years in the area of healthcare, and I was a senior manager there during a time when the department was truly unable to provide good healthcare services or mental health services to our inmate population. We ended up under federal receivership. It was also a time of great violence in the prison program or in the prison institutions. There were regularly violent attacks between groups of inmates that ended up with people being stabbed and hurt and inmates being killed and the correctional officers having things happen to them that they were injured. Not an easy place to work. During that time, I wore a number of hats. I was the chief of public health for a time. I was the director of the department's inmate peer education program. I was the director of telemedicine services. And at the end of my time at corrections, I was the deputy director for strategic healthcare development. I came away from those 16 years with a huge commitment that we need to find different solutions for how we treat our inmates and how we teach them to come back into the community. We really needed to find some cutting-edge ideas that would create some lasting change. So in this position as strategic healthcare deputy director, there were a number of people on my team, and it was the early 2000s, and we were all reading the same book. We were reading Jon Kabat-Zinn's book, Full Catastrophe Living. Anybody read it? And we had heard that there was a program in Seattle that was allowing inmates to live 24/7 in a gym-type environment. They were not in the general population, and that they were spending their time in meditation, in silence, in yoga, that they were kind of like in an ashram sort of situation. And what they found in Seattle, those inmates didn't return. The recidivism rate, which we have over 60%, they had like less than 2%. It was almost nothing. So this group of us said, well, why don't we do a proposal and we'll ask the Department of Corrections to start these statewide. We knew that it had been done a couple times at San Quentin, but we wanted to see it all over. We were not successful, but we did send it up and let people know that we thought it was an idea. And for me, that became the seed that would take 10 years to come to fruition. And it was when I met Sarah Johnson, who is one of the founders of Yoga Seed, and Zach, one of the founders of Yoga Seed. I was taking teacher training, and Sarah was one of my classmates, and she told me about this vision that she and Zach had for starting this place where people could come to a yoga studio and not be restricted by finances or lifestyle or body image or anything, that everybody could just come together in community. And I knew for me, I was completely in on that one. And so I volunteered to become a board member, and so I've been on the board since the organization started. And it was a few years later that this opportunity with the prisons arose, and for me, it just brought this thing full circle. Here had been this seed that we had tried to put into the prison system many, many years before, and here was this opportunity to try it again, to try to really expand the ability of the prisons to have yoga available. So Zach and his team were really successful at getting teachers into the prison setting and having yoga classes. And for those of you who have not been in a prison setting, it is not a simple thing to go into a prison. It's not like you just call them up and say, I'm a yoga teacher and I want to teach there. You have to be sponsored by someone. You have to have a security clearance. You have to go through a class that teaches you how you need to behave and what behaviors you need to watch for on the part of the inmate population, because you could be ending up in a situation where you are a danger. You have to take this class, and then, so you've done all that, now you have to actually just get in to go teach your class. So you have to go through the security checkpoint, and often the prisons are very large, and you have to walk a long distance to be able to get to your class. Your class may or may not happen. You know, if there's an incident, it won't be happening. Worse, if there's an incident while you're teaching your class and they lock the yard down, you get to stay until they're done. And so it's not like teaching where I'm going to go down to my studio, do my class for an hour, spend 15 minutes afterwards, chatting with people and go on. It could take you 4 hours to do a prison yoga class. It didn't seem much like a model that would allow us to have a large core of teachers, nor did it seem like we would really be able to grow that program very large because the time commitment was so big. The other thing that Zach really started to pay attention to was that the teacher training programs needed to be responsive to the unique needs in the prisons. So asana, yes, absolutely. But they also needed nonviolent communication. They needed restorative circles. They needed exposure to the 8 limbs of yoga, but they needed it in a way that was going to be responsive to the culture of the prisons. So from these experiences, something really exciting was born. A new and a real powerful way to bring yoga to the inmates. And it's through peer education. It's through inmates leading yoga classes in prisons. You don't have to have the person necessarily who comes in and has to do the 4 hours to get in and get out. You can have inmates start their own classes if we can teach them in a way that allows them to bring others together. We'd had this great success when I was the manager of the inmate peer education program. We used it for hepatitis and high-risk health behaviors, and it had worked great. So thinking of applying it to yoga seemed a really natural thing to do. So under Zach's leadership, this new program was born, and I believe that this program can grow and can flourish both in the prison and for the graduates when they get out of the prison on their release. That program is called Apply, Ahimsa Prison Peer-Led Yoga. I call it yoga on the yard. We believe that we can take this program, which we believe to be the only one of its kind, and that we can grow that program throughout California and throughout this country. We're optimistic that that program can make some fundamental paradigm shifts for the inmates and for correctional administrators and throughout the prison culture. And that's what this morning is about letting you hear about the many aspects of our prison yoga program. As a little hint of the success that we've had, I'm going to tell you that after we graduated the first group of Apply students, the number of yoga classes increased in the prison from 8 per week to 36 per week. It's a 400% increase. It's almost the same number of classes that we teach at the studio. So as you listen to Zach, just think if we could replicate this program at all 33 prisons. Just think if we could put it in jails and juvenile institutions. Just think how many lives could be changed if we can get this program expanded and widely available in our state.